Are you considering starting a podcast? Or have you started one, but you're not quite sure how to get the word out about it? If so, this episode's for you. Hello and welcome to another episode of Digital Marketing Made Simple. Today I'm very excited to jump into the 7 steps for getting started with podcasting. I have a great free workbook and checklist for you too, so let's jump right into it. Podcasting is a popular and effective way to reach a global audience and share your ideas or stories. However, producing a high-quality podcast requires a lot of time and effort, from recording and editing to promoting and distributing. And you might be wondering, what's involved in getting a podcast up and running? And are there parts of that process that you could potentially outsource, which would really allow you to focus on creating great content without the stress of managing the entire process yourself? If so, you're going to like what you hear. We're going to explore everything you need to know about podcasting and how you can add one to your content calendar or optimize the podcast that you already have. So let's start. First things first, what is a podcast, right? So a podcast is basically audio that a user can download to their personal device and listen to whenever they want. Podcasts generally center around one topic, and each episode usually ranges between 15 and 60 minutes. So I always tell my clients, imagine watching a TV show, but only hearing the audio. That's a podcast. And today in the US, over 28% of individuals listen to podcasts on a weekly basis, which is really huge. It's a lot bigger than you think it is. And if you aren't podcasting, there's definitely still time to get in and get your voice heard. So what equipment do you need to start a podcast? I think this is where people get hung up. They start to think, oh my gosh, I need a really fancy studio. I need all of this very expensive equipment. It's really just about 4 things that you need. You need a really good microphone. This is definitely not the time to use your computer's built-in microphone. You definitely do want to invest in a USB mic that will have really great sound quality. I'll link to some of my favorite options in the show notes, and you can check those out at jennielyon.com/140. You do need a studio or a soundproof room. Easier said than done, right? I don't have either, but I work with what I have, and I try to keep my space as quiet as possible. Obviously, the more quiet, the better, but you have to work with what you have as well. You'll need editing software, so your episode will definitely need to be edited. And if you aren't into learning how to edit and add music, add an intro and an outro, and remove, any type of content that might not fit in, or the 10 mistakes that I made on this podcast that my editor fixed, thank you, Greg, I appreciate it, then you might want to outsource that part of the podcast production, as I do. A hosting platform. So before you can get your podcast out into the world, you do have to upload it into a hosting platform that will help to distribute it. So again, I'll link to some of my favorite hosting options in the show notes. All right, well, how do you get started, right? You have your equipment. Now what? Well, first things first, you need to find a unique and compelling topic. So what expertise do you have that you can share with your audience? What passion do you have that you can talk about for days on end? Start there and then start by asking yourself a few questions. Grab a pen and paper and jot these down. Are there other podcasts doing the exact same topic? If so, how can you make yours different or better? So really think, how can I fill in the gap? Is this idea that I have for my podcast timely? Is it relevant? Will anyone care? Is there an audience that's going to be interested in this content? If so, what type of podcast content should you create for them? Is there enough content for me to talk about episode after episode after episode? And are you going to be doing interview-based content? Is it going to be a monologue? Will you have a co-host? Once you do this exercise, you're really going to find that if you have clear answers to these questions, then you probably have a really great podcast topic. And if you're still kind of struggling with getting started, please jump over, check out the show notes, or jump over to jennielyon.com/podcasting to download our How to Start Podcasting workbook. It's a great workbook and checklist that really outlines everything that you need to launch your podcast in record time. So what parts of the podcasting process can you outsource? So once you're ready to start recording, you really do want to consider what parts of this process do I want to do, and what parts would it make more sense to outsource. So here are some of the pieces of the process that we usually recommend for our clients. So this will at least get you started. So most of our clients will just record the audio and send it to us. We do everything else, and that includes writing the script or the bullet points that they use as their podcast content. But beyond that, we do the audio editing. We edit the audio files to ensure they're very high quality. We remove background noise, add the intros and outros, trim the audio for time constraints, everything that you could possibly do to make the audio amazing. We do the show notes and the scripts, writing out, detailed scripts for recording or summaries for the show notes of the podcast episode, everything including timestamps, key takeaways, any additional resources that are mentioned throughout the episode. Then we do promotion, right? So we do everything from, blog posts promoting the content to social media content to email marketing. And then we manage all of those different types of pieces so that we can promote the podcast and connect with as many listeners as possible. Another big part of the podcast production is graphic design. So everything from designing a logo for your podcast to creating the other visual aspects to support the podcast brand and enhance the visual appeal. So that could be graphics for social media, it could be graphics for the email, the podcast itself. There's a lot of graphics involved. Once you've determined what parts of the process that you want to handle, then you can really start to move forward. If all you want to do is hit record, then you can use a team like ours who can do everything else for you. Next up is you really need to finalize your podcast assets. So once you have the first few podcasts recorded, now it's time to go back and decide on a name and a logo for the podcast. And the reason that I like to do this is because once you've recorded a few episodes, you're going to really feel inspired. And most of the time, the name will just come to you as you start to record those first few podcasts. So make sure that you go back, pick a really great name, and think about what logo you're going to use for the assets. Then you need to set it up somewhere. Either you need to set up a website that's devoted to the podcast, or you're going to want to add a podcast section on your current website, because you really do need a home for your podcast, and your website is a great place to home your podcast. And you really can just create a podcast page where it will live, and that will include everything from the episodes to the show notes and transcripts, links, everything will be there. And it's a really great idea because now you have a place to push all of that traffic to. And if you do the SEO right, then you can reach consumers who'll be interested in your content and that can find you via search engine results. All right, a little bit more on the promotion, right? This is something I hear a lot where people think, I have a great idea for a podcast. I've recorded some episodes. I can upload them and that's it, right? People are going to find me and it's going to be amazing. Wrong. Sorry. Having a great podcast, it isn't enough to attract an audience. You really have to get the word out. And having a robust podcast promotion strategy is really going to be key for attracting that ideal audience. So you want to start early. You want to start promoting the podcast before it even launches. You want to build buzz around, the current content that you have. You want to start to build out that audience before the podcast even launches. And here's a little pro tip. Once the podcast goes live, Start asking for reviews immediately. Reviews will definitely help you to get more listeners and should be part of your launch strategy. Next up is to measure the metrics, right? You guys know how I feel about tracking metrics. I'm constantly saying analyze, 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 tweak. Once your podcast is in full swing, you really have to monitor its performance. So you're going to be looking at things like how many subscribers do you have? How many monthly downloads are you getting? How many number of unique views are you getting to the podcast page? What's the average listening time? By really tracking those metrics, you're going to know pretty immediately what type of content that you're putting out is popular. That way you can create more content like that. Or if you can see that particular episodes are really popular, you might want to cover those topics a little bit more in depth. And by following these tips, you can really set your podcast up from success from the get-go. It will really help to ensure that you and your podcast team stay on track, that your production of the podcast runs smoothly, and ensures that your podcast is a success. You can build upon the metrics that are performing well for you. You can analyze and tweak every week as you go. And if you're already feeling stressed out about the amount of work involved in starting a podcast, don't fret, we can definitely help. This will really allow you to do what you should be doing anyways, which is focusing on that one thing that only you can do and leave the heavy lifting to us. All right, so here's your action items for this week. Jump over to jennylyon.com/podcasting and download our Getting Started with Podcasting workbook and checklist. And then give yourself some time to start working through it. Once you get through it as far as you feel that you can on your own, go ahead and schedule a free call at jennylyon.com/chat, and let's look over your business together and the workbook to see if podcasting is a good fit for your current business model. And if you already have a podcast, then make a checklist of the parts of the production process that would make sense to take off your plate. These are the items that you should really hand off. So if there's certain pieces that you feel really confident in doing, great, but try to get the rest of it off of your plate so that you can really stick within your zone of genius. And then last but not least, get started. Record a couple of episodes, whether you're doing them solo or you're interviewing with someone. Get those 2 episodes under your belt, and I'm telling you, you're going to get excited, and it's really going to propel you to move forward and to build that successful podcast. All right, well, that's what I have for you this week. I hope you found these tips on getting your podcast up and running helpful. Don't forget to grab the free workbook and checklist, and I'll see you next time on another episode of Digital Marketing Made Simple. See you soon.